Adam, welcome to the pod. The first topic I wanted to look at was immigration. We have Henry Nowak, an 18-year-old who was murdered in Southampton in December, the riots and protests going on in Belfast. What are your initial thoughts around those two incidences?
I'll probably say something I don't think anyone said before. And that is, we've had more migrants in the last 30 years than we've ever had into the United Kingdom. Only the most insane, left-leaning, grass-eating lunatics would suggest that open borders are genuinely a good idea and a thing that we want. Some people who are very pro-migration will say the country's built on the back of immigrants. It's demonstrably not true, and it's again a difficult. Which migrants do we want? But actually, Labour have done quite a good job on deportation. They just don't want to say it.
When you look at Henry Nowak, with regards to this two-tier policing, do you think we have a two-tier policing problem in the UK?
And you've probably got more tiers than that.
There is no external standard that we look into.
I think the only thing I disagree with in what you just said is that we don't have a compass or a guide anymore. What we've been guided by is algorithms.
Again, this label of racist, I think that's going to be the big discussion that we come out the other side of this with, is where people are afraid to have opinions, especially, and I'm going to say this, and we'll probably get hate online, but my question to you is the UK government right now, where are we at and who do you think can fix this?
Well, where are we at? Incredibly weak. I mean, incredibly, tragically weak.
Adam, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, Dylan.
Round 2. It is so good to have you back, and thanks for doing this on such short notice because you've pulled through. But we wanted to keep this topical and talk into some really pressing issues in the country currently. And really, it's time sensitive, I felt, to be able to bring some common sense to the discussion where we're actually looking at facts and also dealing with the emotions that people are feeling. And the first topic I wanted to look at was immigration.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, immigration, there's a huge debate going on in the country right now. Political parties are divided over it. We have Henry Nowak, an 18-year-old first-year student at the University of Southampton, who was murdered in Southampton in December. But that video came out and it's caused this big debate around race, around policing, and immigration's come into that. Stephen Ogilvie, the man in Belfast who was murdered, and the riots and protests going on in Belfast, it seems like the country is at this, a bit of melting pot where anything could happen. What are your initial thoughts around those two incidences? And then we'll go into the economics of it and all of that.
I'll probably say something I don't think anyone said before. And that is, you get this around this time of year quite often sometimes as well, because heat causes something strange within the populace. If you think back to some of the riots that we've had over the summer and any of these incidents, they're obviously all tinderbox incidents, and it doesn't necessarily matter when they happened. As you say, Henry Nowak was last year, realistically. So there's definitely a factor in that somewhere, but realistically, they're proxies, aren't they? They're always proxies. I think one of the upsetting things I heard from the Henry Nowak thing was, obviously the family have been very vocal about no violence in my son's name. And of course, it's absolutely tragic for someone to lose a child of any age. Certainly in 18, prime of his life, and those wishes haven't really been respected. So it becomes a bit of a proxy. And the worst thing, I think, and I can understand it, because the parallel was drawn with George Floyd, because Henry Nowak was saying, I can't breathe. And that's the only link I think there is really. The martyring, or the attempted martyring, I suppose, really should say, of George Floyd, to be clear, not that he deserved to die, but the attempted martyring of him by a certain part of the political spectrum or pressure groups and things like that was realistically a bit of a disgrace, In the real world, George Floyd was a scumbag, and there was evidence that he was a scumbag. Not the same about Henry Nowak, right? Then the difficulty of someone playing a race card in order to evade detection. It shouldn't really be relevant in any way, shape, or form that the murderer was a Sikh. It's very, very deeply uncharacteristic of the Sikh community, and that's why it's caused a big backlash within the Sikh community. And I would say friends of mine who are Sikh have been some of the most vocal about recent immigration. We probably need to distinguish between migration that happened in perhaps a more controlled manner. I think it would be fair to say, and there's not really a date in time. We could say 30 years ago for the sake of picking a date, because that's around about when the numbers really started to pick up. We've had more migrants in the last 30 years than we've ever had into the United Kingdom.
Is that a fact?
That's a fact, yeah. And that's an incredible stat when you think about it. And then it's, who do you want to blame for that? If blame is even the right word, right? Because there are pluses and minuses, as you said, and everyone is too scared to either, or perhaps too bigoted to consider there might be any pluses, because guess what? There are some. Or too scared to say, actually, there are some minuses. And really, we should have sensible, honest conversations about the sort of migrants that we do want, because only the most insane, left-leaning, grass-eating lunatics would suggest that open borders are genuinely a good idea and a thing that we want. Because it's only natural to imagine if you do that, you're going to get the unwanted from all other countries, wherever you are in the world, whether you live on an island like we do, or whether you're in any particular other country. So open borders completely. And if you said, well, look, the EU has open borders, in the Schengen area, it does, sure. But it doesn't have open borders with the rest of the world, right? So, of course, you've seen examples across the EU, Germany taking 1 million people within a year, that filtering through to causing, essentially, it's not a fluke that Alternative for Deutschland have got such a big political hold. Those things are not unrelated, so there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. And we can sort of go in any direction with that you want, really. I've got some stats in my head as usual. I've got personal views, but I also like to try and be as factual as possible, because ultimately the economist in me, which is ultimately what I am really at heart, rather than a political specialist or a political strategist or anything like that, the economist in me understands the economic necessity. So, for example, I saw a Restore Britain post that someone shared on LinkedIn the other day. LinkedIn don't normally get that political, and generally probably wiser to stay away from it. But I read it and I was horrified. I was as horrified, or more horrified, than I was when I first read what Reform's very first economic proposals were, which since then have now been refined as they started to try and win an election, apart from anything else. But these first ones, I actually commented on it saying the only thing this would restore is it would restore Britain back to the 70s, the 1870s. Because the ideas in it would be so damaging.
What was the gist of the post?
Well, primarily, let's make, and the trouble is, this is the typical way that it is. It sounds good. It sounds appealing, right? Every local authority will only buy British. That was the thing that I really zoomed in on. I was like, do you understand what that would do? Imagine if you don't know what you're doing. And Reform are having a bit of these problems at the moment. They've got councillors openly saying, we need training, we don't know what to do. Now, I think you've got to try and, again, see the positives in that. New people into the political system need to kick up the you-know-where. That's all good. I've always supported the right of Nigel Farage to exist in the political system, just like the right of Zach Polanski to exist within the political system. Agitators are a good thing. They shine lights on things, right? Doesn't mean I want either of them to be Prime Minister, but there we go. So this is a typical thing that happens in these situations. Let's go with buy British for local. And look, what would happen? Let's look at the positives. Look at all the extra jobs it would have to create. That would need investment to be able to reshore manufacturing, apart from anything else, to demand services, to supply services that local authorities need. What would the price of that be? One of the things we never talk about when we buy from abroad, if you buy a lot of stuff on Temu or Shein or frankly Amazon or whatever, and I'm not positioning myself in a moral compass high ground. I do, not off Temu and Shein, to be honest, but I do off Amazon, absolutely. If they're coming from abroad, they're probably from a country where workers are paid less and are treated more badly than they are in the United Kingdom. But we don't see them, so we can be semi-comfortable with that. And frankly, unless you do, I mean, I don't look at the supply chain and sign off every single country of everything I buy comes from. I had some blueberries on the way here today. I can't tell you the country of origin of the blueberries, although it is on the packaging, right? But I can't tell you what they were. And I wouldn't have not bought them if they were from, pick any country you want that's politically difficult.
Well, I think that this is the thing, just to jump in here is I was just in Turkey with some friends, and we're at a wedding, and we're having this discussion about protesting, and talking about Gaza, and some of these guys have gone to a Gaza protest, and I was just talking about the reality of some of the issues that people haven't thought through. So they haven't thought through the nth degree of an argument, and the pushback is, well, you can protest something you don't fully understand. Like the initial thing is wrong, but I was like, okay, what are the solutions? When you actually come to a solution conversation, a lot of people know how to protest, but then it's so complex. The Middle East is incredibly complex to bring lasting peace to that region. To try and figure that out is absolutely crazy. So we're having this discussion, and I think the thing that struck me is I said, well, why is no one protesting the kids in the Congo mining cobalt, for all these electric cars and iPhones and all these things? And I said, it's because it's convenient. We'll put up, a post from our iPhone without questioning where the materials are, sourced from. And someone will fact check this and say, oh, all of Apple's products are legitimate. I said, yeah, I'm from Africa. I know how to get a stamp on something that you need. So my question is, around this immigration debate, these protests, everything, do you think both sides, and I'm going to use sides here because I think people are getting very riled up, and they're getting very emotional, and rightly so, in a lot of cases, but they're not thinking of the ramifications. For example, when it starts affecting the local doctor, the GP, that is an immigrant.
Yeah.
What can you just speak into that, and where you see it going generationally as well, if you can?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's definitely misinformation around it, in as much as some people who are very pro migration will say countries built on the back of immigrants. It's demonstrably not true, realistically. If you follow that, 30 years, more people in the country than there have been for 2,000 plus years from a migration perspective. NHS is built on the back of migrants, demonstrably true. Right, demonstrably true. The numbers are there visually. You can see very easily when and as you're unlucky enough or have the requirement to use the services of the NHS. Economic perspective of that, we train doctors at a loss at university and export them currently. We don't really want to, but we export them to Canada, Australia. Australia have a fantastic marketing machine that entraps our doctors. Very smart of the Australians, because we've lost money on those children that haven't paid tax and have consumed school services, and then pay. And people will go, well, what about the university fees? It costs way more money to train a doctor than we charge them, because we have this kind of Marxist style system of charging university fees where it doesn't matter what course you do, it doesn't matter where you go, it doesn't matter how good the university is, it just matters how many years you stay there, and that's how many years worth of fees that you're going to pay. So then we have a black hole of doctors that we then have to import from countries where we are doing what Australia are doing to us. Do you see what I mean? They have been trained. Now you could argue, well, how long has their training been as robust? Is it as good as it is in the UK university system? Probably not. The UK is arguably still the number one university system in the world, and certainly per capita, it's the number one, because we still have 4 of the world's top 10 universities in the United Kingdom, which is something we should be very proud of. We're not very good at being proud of stuff like that. We're good at being proud of the flag or ashamed by the flag, both of which are semi-tragic positions in many ways. I think you should be proud of the flag, but that doesn't mean you want to stand shoulder to shoulder with, people who are causing problems by leading demonstrations which will lead to overspill into violence and hatred, which are not positive ways to solve problems.
Absolutely, but what's led us to that point?
Well, I think we live in a world, don't we, where we've probably, I didn't say probably, we've conceded too much to the liberal left to an extent. You come into a place where you're not allowed to offend anyone anymore. You get a certificate for turning up. These are terrible things. That famous phrase, weak times, strong times create weak men, weak times create strong men sort of thing. There's a reason why that happens. The whole Gaza or protest situation in general, the Jordan Peterson approach is clean your room, right? It's in his 12 rules for life, isn't it? Go and clean your room. But the point behind that being, worry about your own little stuff before you try and solve the big stuff. And the difficulty, and some of these situations are really difficult. We're further away from peace in the Middle East than we've been for decades. I think that's objectively, very obviously true at the moment. Picking a side is extremely difficult because you have to, first of all, separate Jewish people from Israel. You've got to make a very, very clear distinction about that. And you've got to separate Gaza from Palestine from Hamas. Most people don't frame the conversation in that way, right? But if you don't think that Hamas are bad people or are incorrectly prescribed as an international terrorist organization, I'm afraid that you're kidding yourself. You have to see the evidence. You can watch the videos of what they play to their children in schools to indoctrinate them against Israel, to bring people up who want to destroy Israel and do things, the sort of things that happen on October the 7th, 2023, that people will be familiar with. Does that allow Israel to do whatever they want in response? Are Israel incredibly good at dressing that up with PR and things like that? Are they careful within the Geneva Convention of War? Yes. Are there a whole number of genocide scholars who are not all left-leaning, card-carrying, grass-eating lunatics saying that there's a genocide going on here? Yes. So the trouble is we want to pick sides. We like to toss coins. We like to see Man City versus Man United and pick one. And you can't here. And it's not a draw as in a positive draw. There's a lot of big negatives on both sides and a lot of people dying on the back of it. But that's a difficult conversation for people to have because there isn't any right or wrong in there. That's not sitting on the fence. That's summarising the
complexity of it.
Exactly.
But you see, this is why it's so interesting, having this discussion now, because I realize in talking to people, you're almost forced into, you are this, you're pro.
Yeah.
And I love that distinction, by the way, and this is a bit off topic, but with Israel and Jewish people, because one of my good friends is a lawyer in London, and he'd be great to have on the podcast and debate this, because also quite a centrist guy, very intelligent. And he was talking where he got an email from a Muslim friend. Well, he had emailed him saying, hey, just checking in with how you're doing. And the guy replied, said, I just need to check, are you a Zionist? If you are, we can never talk again. And this was a developer, property developer, won't share names or anything. And he said, he drafted this email, he was so hurt. He said, firstly, I'm Jewish, I'm not an Israeli. Two different things.
Yeah.
And he explained it, but he said, the fact, I've never asked, are you part of Al-Qaeda?
No. Or which sect of
Islam are you?
Yeah, exactly.
But this is where we're at in this cultural moment, which concerns me because this is why I'm feeling so passionate about getting, even more of a debate set up here.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking people aren't having these logical conversations and get into a more centrist position, because if we're not careful, we've been forced through algorithms into more and more hateful areas.
Yeah, divisive stuff does well, gets clicks, right? It's absolutely true. Yeah.
And it feeds what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And so to say something like, when I watch any videos in Gaza and I see kids dying, no one wants to see children dying. There has to be a part in us as humans, we say on both sides, but the complexity when you hear soldiers talking and they having to take a shot, but a child's been held in front of them with, what do you do in that situation? It's a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
So on the immigration thing in the UK, what I'm sensing is there's this undercurrent in society going on right now. And I think people are being forced into these camps. It's either you for immigration or you're against immigration.
Yeah.
Can you just talk into that and distinguish between legal and illegal immigration, what your thoughts are?
And that's absolutely key. And I'll probably start with the second bit first, because when you look at the numbers around that sort of stuff, the illegal is 5% or single figure percentage of all of the migration as a rule. And it gets used. And this is politics in general. You focus on the Daily Mail, for example, has always wanted to focus on the person with 23 children who's never worked in their life, who just lives off £183,000 a year out the benefit system or whatever. The reality is, even if that single example is even true, that is an insane example of the system. And it's not the 23 children's fault either. So what do you want to do? You want them to starve because mum is whatever or dad is whatever or they both are? It's not right, is it? But it's the reductio ad absurdum part. Now, I think a lot of this speaks to the state of the country in terms of cost of living crisis, as it's been termed as a general rule, there are lots of people who hate what they do who don't get paid very much money to do it. And I think those people look at people who are in it, and again, it's even the word hotel. I mean, I've walked around a couple of these places. There's one in Solihull, a beautiful listed building that actually the council have recently enforced them to perform some repairs on it. It was losing bombs of money. It was bought by 2 or 3 business people. They were losing bombs on it. Then asylum contract. It's now making millions of pounds a year. That's the reality of that side of it. It hasn't stirred up any sort of major stuff locally, although there have been some protests across the road from where it is, for sure. And I walked around one when I was charging my car at one point in a site, in a weird, I was in this site and it was weird. I thought, what's going on? And it was an asylum hotel. And that's where all the fencing was up and things like that. And had a look around at how good is this hotel. Realistically, it's horrible, right? But still, you see the word hotel. You made the point earlier on, people aren't necessarily looking for all the information before they make a decision. You think hotel, that word brings out holiday, 4-star, 5-star, getting looked after, breakfast, lunch and dinner, blah, blah, blah. This is luxury, right? I'm pretty sure the food that Serco and others are available are knocking out is not going to be luxury, right? It's going to be pretty ropey. And of course, there are some people who are there legitimately, some people who are there illegitimately, because as soon as you create a system and a set of rules, you will get bad actors get around those rules. Now, we don't know how many are legitimate and illegitimate. This is a problem, but we do know it's 5, 6, 7% of the migration that we're talking about. But if your people, this really is a governmental problem, isn't it? Because if your populace are so concerned and having, frankly, such a crap time in life that they would rather be in a hotel getting paid £7 a day as long as they were being fed, that's bad. If a decent swathe of the population are feeling like that, you've got a problem somewhere, and you've got to make sure your communication is better, or you've got to sort out the root cause of the problem. It'd be nice if this government or any government tried to do that, to be honest with you. Then you've got legal, right? And I think we probably need to pass legal into a few different buckets as well. Because
just to confirm, so you put asylum in illegal?
Well, they have. I'm talking about if they have come into the country illegally and then claimed asylum. You're right to do the qualification, because that's not the only way to claim asylum, right? It just tends to be, that's picking me up for being lazy with my terminology, which is very fair.
No, right? Because I haven't actually looked at the. I know how many asylum seekers officially are in the country, but I don't know which percentage how they entered. Which would be an interesting one. Maybe, Katie, if you can bring that up. Yeah,
that'd be good. That'd be good to know. But I bet it's the vast majority have entered illegally and claimed asylum. Because we know, because people like Migration Observatory and Migration Watch track the small boats, or they publish the data. The Home Office track the small boats, and we know how many small boats have been coming in. But one of the things we don't know, for example, one of the things that surprised me, and this is about context. There may be 20,000 come in on small boats in a year. There was a year like this a couple of years ago. And in Tenerife, right, which bear in mind is how far off the west coast of Africa? I don't know. It's close enough. You can make the journey. There were more than twice as many small boats into Tenerife, people illegally into Tenerife, than there were into the United Kingdom, which absolutely blew my mind. And put me off moving to the Canary Islands, to be honest, as well. But that's a different story. But that's obviously a relatively small number when we're talking about legal. And then quite often, for whatever reason, when people are trying to defuse the argument, or unfortunately, and it does tend to be a left-right thing. It's not always. There are plenty of people now on the left who are not mega keen on migration. But generally speaking, it tends to get characterised as left and right, and sort of look down their nose at them because they're kind of like, well, these other people are legal. What we're not doing is then asking the question, although it does happen in the background, and it's again a difficult, which migrants do we want? Now, countries that have sort of point scoring systems, things like I said, Australia know who they want. They want doctors trained in the UK for a start, and they have entire big marketing campaigns to try and attract those doctors and tell them how great it is in Australia. And of course, there are the goods and the bads of living in Australia. I wouldn't go because of the spiders, Dylan, but I'm a scaredy cat, you know. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't go because the Australians there, but
let's see if we can upset everyone in one podcast.
I mean, might as well offend everyone, but it's an interesting one because I saw, because I was going to come to that later, and is looking at how to reform the immigration system in the UK, because I fully agree with you, and actually get something that works, because Australia works. I remember being in South Africa as a teacher, and a lot of good teachers, plumbers, electricians at the time. We had this mass, brain drain in the country.
Yes. Yeah.
People were like, there's instability in the country.
Yes.
And they left en masse.
I know lots of South Africans who've come to the UK exactly because of that. And not just South Africans, but people from all sorts of countries over the years, from Uganda to Iran to all sorts of countries.
And but Katie's just put this up. So in the year ending March 26, there are approximately 44,000 detected arrivals via illegal or irregular entry routes into the UK, with small boat crossings accounting for 90%, 39,000 of all these cases. Yeah. So it's roughly half, because they're 90...
But that 93K figure of how many asylum
accommodation,
they're in the system, aren't they? And some of them have been over 12 months. And part of the problem is continual appeals and things like that.
So some have it integrated already.
I still think it'll be more than 90% of those who've claimed asylum have arrived what is illegal, although there can be a legal argument around that as well. But I don't think we should.
And what's interesting about this, though, because people that are pushing back, especially my more left-leaning friends, if we are at a poker game or something like that, this will come up and they'll say, "Oh no, I have a friend," as if that means,
it's like asking for a friend. Yeah.
And I said, I am from a third world country. I have friends too, right? Yeah. And I said, there's something I found so interesting, because my friends and good people, but that have claimed asylum here, they've arrived here and they've just learned what to say.
Absolutely.
And they were absolutely fine in their home country.
So this is exactly the same as the situation that we're seeing at the moment with, everybody worries about the welfare system. We don't talk about the right things in the welfare system. We could get right into that if you want to. I've got the numbers at my fingertips pretty much around that. But
let's come to that later.
Some of that is really about what people say and what angers people. So similarly to the illegal migration argument, people get very motivated by personal independence payment, PIP, disability living allowance, things like that. And there is definitely a case to which it works on a point scoring system. And if you say you have anxiety and depression, it is the equivalent of the 1980s bad back. It can't be evidenced, and you're doing it to score points. And at the ridiculous end of the metropolitan liberal elite lefties, they're looking at these figures going, oh my goodness, all of these people with anxiety and depression. They're not making the connection that some of those people are just saying it to get the points so that they can pass the test, because this information changes hands, and people that I see who are long-term in the benefit system are actually pretty entrepreneurial about making sure they rinse the benefit system, because it's the classic victimless crime of the government. And once you've decided you can blame the government, somebody else, your mum and dad or whoever, and you haven't got that accountability for yourself, or you're trapped within the system, and that's the other side of the coin, then all systems go, what do I need to say to who to get the best? And so that is the old Charlie Munger, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. You create the system, people work out a way around the system, you have to change the system. The governmental game of cat and mouse. Government is very slow at these things. Again, little spoken of. Sunak changed the rules December 2024. The reason why the numbers have dropped, or one of the reasons why so significantly, is because of changes the Conservatives made in the last government. But the Conservatives know full well they can't go back and say, well, look at what we changed on migration, when you had the Boris wave of people. But the Boris wave, again, you need to try and segment some of that wave. So Hong Kong, British Nationals Overseas, the programme was called, or is called, right? A really interesting example, because from an economic perspective, the average citizen that moved from Hong Kong brought £375,000 of net worth into the United Kingdom. So came in, rented houses, got big jobs, bought rental properties. I know you're not allowed to be a landlord anymore. That's all toxic and all the rest of it. But this is what they did. And do you, from a simple, plain economic perspective, in fact, let's go beyond economic, right? Let's go for the full spectrum of PESEL or whatever, right? Politically, are they heavily motivated? Are they involved in any, prescribed terrorist organizations? No, they're not. Economic, they're bringing money into the country. They're also bringing economic value. They're going to work. They're going to pay PAYE tax, national insurance. They're contributors to the system, right? Social, do they integrate particularly well? People would have a different view on that. I suppose the stereotype would be they largely keep themselves to themselves a little bit. But like many people, when they move to a different country, they integrate within their own community first. But I've certainly never found them to be... I lived in Switzerland for a couple of years. The Swiss I found very, very insular. But that might be because I lived in Geneva and they were the French Swiss and they... Who knows? I don't know. I wasn't broadly travelled enough or didn't think enough of a level to think about that. Technological, is it good to bring them over? Probably. Yeah, definitely. So environmental, is it causing a big issue around any of that? Not really. If they're having one flight and then coming over to live in the United Kingdom, I suppose they might need to fly to China and back regularly. So there's an argument around that. But you see, generally speaking, they would score pretty well on the balanced scorecard. Whereas if you come to the country from, and it doesn't really matter necessarily about the country you're from, but there would be, you could pick the top 5 or 6 countries in terms of migration. And you bring, as you were allowed to do under the rules, your dependent wife and 2 children, and you were doing a course at XYZ university and then dropped out, and then you had 2 children who need schooling, and then a wife who's not working, who is in whatever system, or you bring your parents over who've got health needs, who've lived through other countries where the health care system isn't as good. There's a huge economic drain there, a big, big negative that absolutely needed to be stopped. That actually started to happen when you look at the figures, but the Boris wave stuff, it started to happen after COVID because people became much more healthcare conscious, and they were highly motivated to move to a country with ultimately a nationalised healthcare system. Here we are, still free at the point of consumption, mostly, apart from dental and prescription, really,
Yeah, and I think this is something on the, and I think diving a bit more into the legal side is the figure here is 813,000 people arrived in 2025.
That's gross arrivals, is it?
Gross arrivals. We had the net figure. I think it was about 200,000.
It's about 174k or something like that, 184k.
Yeah. So 184, which I was surprised because that wasn't from a net perspective. It seems a lot more. A
lot of this is part of this, and this is part of where everybody gets a bit naughty with these statistics as a general rule, because Farage has used this a lot. He said, well, 29% of them are working. Okay, hold on a second. How many of them are students? And again, from an economic perspective, do we gain or do we lose? Now, international students pay bigger fees, and we go on about our own fees, right? But they come in, my experience of international students in my MBA cohort, they came over, they were from wealthy families as a general rule. They were paying 30k plus a year in fees. They were then renting the flats, spending the money in the restaurants. They were desperate to move to London, where they would have bought another flat, paid a lot of stamp duty, gone and worked at KPMG or Deloitte or whatever, and been serious contributing members of the economy. And at the time, Theresa May was the Home Secretary when I did my MBA. And they were chucking people out after, I think it was 3 months after they finished, they had to be back home. And no one could go through the visa sponsorship process in that time. So we sent away all these people that really we should have wanted from a brain drain perspective. And again, I appreciate the political sensitivities of saying it, but frankly, if I was in charge of the country, I would be saying, why don't we bring in the best people that we can and try and retain them? I'm not going to be ashamed of that. Donald Trump's sure not ashamed of it. Not that he's a great role model, but other countries are thinking like that and taking actions like that. Why should we be under the counter? We're a great country to live in. Come and live here if you've got something to offer and if you're willing to offer something. But we will have fairly stringent requirements around that. And it doesn't mean that we don't have room for some legitimate, genuine asylum cases, which, look, we talked about the Hong Kong cohort. What about the Ukrainians? I certainly don't remember any massive backlash against bringing Ukrainians to the UK. Many people opened up their homes. There were a few people saying, go on then, Gary Lineker, have one in your house or whatever, which he then went and did, as I understand it. But there wasn't real anger from, they were attacked. They're in Europe, very much in the Overton window, massive in the media. Most people were pretty sympathetic to all of that. But different from the Hong Kong scheme, not bringing net assets over, bringing women and children over because men were conscripted, right? So some women obviously working, right? But many children of school age who needed to get out of a war-torn country. That's going to cost the UK economy. Probably in the long run, that would cost the UK economy, but it wouldn't be a huge amount of money, and money that we would feel that we could spend. And when you compare it to Poland, who took, I think, 2 million Ukrainians or something like that, and embarrassed a lot of the rest of Europe in that way, in many ways, you think, right, okay, well, maybe we can do a bit on that front. And I think most people were kind of with that. Then you look at some of these, dodgier universities that have let people in, and they've brought various dependents with them. And the rules have now been changed to stop that. One of the things Sunak did, I think it was December 2024. And so that's filtered through. So a lot of the people leaving are students who otherwise might have been, or dependents who would have been able to stay, who aren't allowed to stay anymore. But then, if you're foaming at the mouth about this stuff, you just turn around and say, well, who makes sure they leave the country? The Home Office. And we are pretty rubbish at that. But actually, Labour have done quite a good job on deportation. They just don't want to say it because they know they'll upset most of their voter base, because they go, oh, no, we're deporting people. We should be, shouldn't we? We should be deporting them, right? Barack Obama was a massive deporter of people. Again, he didn't shout about it an awful lot. But when you look back at the figures, he just enforced it in the way that, again, comes back to who really thinks open borders are a good idea? Only complete lunatics. It's like saying, I'll just leave your house open then. Why don't you leave your front door open? What will happen?
And I think it's an interesting one, because I think those thoughts are birthed in places of privilege.
Yeah, I totally, you can afford to have that wonderful, this is it, if you're a charitable person who wasn't a charitable person until you were a multimillionaire, well, I'm glad you are now, because there are multimillionaires who aren't charitable people. But understand that you afford that. You have the luxury, that the thought of the poker game, the leisure activity in a country where there aren't rockets flying over your head at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely.
Where you can have a disagreement, political argument, robust discussion, let's say, about some important issues in the world where people have different positions. What a lovely privilege it is to be able to do that. What a privilege to be able to go and protest about something that you don't fully understand, when you haven't cleaned your room, right? And you're taking a side that, in my opinion, you probably shouldn't be taking, and you're probably not in possession of all of the facts, or your ideology is blinding you. I saw this. I was in Solihull last weekend, Saturday. There's a sort of communication desk of people supporting the Palestinian cause and saying we need to stop selling arms to Israel or whatever. And I was just like, I don't understand why you. I almost went and spoke to them, but I thought no good will come of this conversation. I've got one of my kids with me. I don't really want him to put through a full Adam Lawrence rant. It won't go that well. So I'll just leave it. But they're almost certainly not in possession of all the facts. Yeah, we do sell arms, right? Anyone you sell, you don't tend to sell arms. And I'm talking to a South African. I appreciate that. You don't send arms to great people as a general rule. Right? So if you've got an arms industry, it is what it is to a large extent, right?
Absolutely.
And there is the economic side of it employs people and blah, blah, blah. I'm not an arms dealer. Everyone stops in their own place of where they're comfortable with their product, right? But it comes back to your point, from a position of privilege. From a position of privilege.
What was interesting to me is, back to my poker table, and the guys watching this would laugh, because
I'm all in.
And we need to get you around for that game, because I think it would be a great discussion as well. But we're sitting around the table, and I said, hey, what are your political views currently? And what really interested me was everyone that was an immigrant. There are quite a few of us that are first generation immigrants. Were pro border control. Like super pro border control, and were actually angry. Because they were like, I would have more rights if I came on a boat. Some of
the angriest people I know about this issue are first and second generation migrants, because apart from anything else, especially second generation, actually, from my anecdotal experience, but that is because almost certainly mum and dad have followed a path. They've come to the country with nothing. They have flogged themselves working 80, 90, 100 plus hours a week. They've done everything they could, maybe to send their kid to a fee-paying school or whatever they could do to give them a start in life. And they've suffered abuse. They suffered horrendous racism back in the 60s, 70s, stuff like that. And now people are coming, and this is the impression that the red carpet's rolled out for them. They get to go straight to a hotel. We had to live in a flea pit, 19 of us in a 2-bedroom flat in wherever, and whatever. And that is, and some of that is factually true. And you can understand why they think like, well, why did my mum and dad have to do that? And now you're getting handed this, and you can go and work for Deliveroo, or other apps are available, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
You can go for Deliveroo with your mate's mobile phone, who is illegal, and you get in through these nearly organised crime networks, really, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But then the flip side of that argument is let the asylum seekers work, right?
This is true.
And there is a something to be explored around all of that without a shadow of a doubt. But the reality is it's a much bigger problem. It blew up fairly quickly, since Brexit, as it goes. Apart from anything else, no one really likes to have that argument either.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I'm massive, I voted Remain, but I agonised over it. I thought very closely. There were times I always knew really the economic side would be problematic, and it has been extremely problematic. And ironically enough, it's one of the reasons why people are so angry about migration that has also been caused by Brexit, which is a strange thing. They were less angry when it was Eastern Europeans. They were angry because they were pretty good tradespeople and they were cheaper than them. And certainly people in the construction industry were pretty angry about how many Polish builders there were and all the rest of it. I bet they hark back to those days now. And then you have to also bear in mind there are the stats around some of the areas that are the angriest in the UK about the current migration, which is generally speaking non-white as a general rule, are in areas of the country which are 96, 97, 98% white, which is a very strange phenomenon. And it's difficult to track that away because they're not the ones who are potentially suffering from, and this is the blame the migrants versus blame the rich, right? Neither of them are really the true party that are at fault. My view would be blame the government for not sorting out what they need to sort out. Yeah. But blame the migrants because you can't get a place at the GP surgery. Well, is that to do with that, or is that to do with austerity and the last 15 years of government that's kind of pushed us down that track? And it's very easy then to blame the migrants for that. Blame the rich. There's so much wealth. Gabriel Zucman tells us we could get 15 billion a year from a wealth tax. We all know that wouldn't work. Let's say we managed to collect 7.5 billion, which we wouldn't. That would be not even 1% of what we spend on government spending, because 1.15 trillion. It's a drop in a bucket. It's an ideological nod towards something. Hospitality industry are currently lobbying for half VAT because they're struggling so much. That would cost us £10 billion a year. So the wealth tax would be gone just by halving VAT on hotels and pubs, which many would say is not the greatest cause out there in the world. So context is super important in these. It's certainly important to me.
But I think this is so important because if you're looking at context, especially on this issue, you know, when we're talking about migration and even like the GP surgery, because there's been honest, like when I go to the doctors, which isn't that often, but you know, I went in there and I thought, okay, there's no, you know, everyone that I could see was foreign.
Yeah.
You know, in there. Yeah. But then I went and saw my doctor who's Iranian.
Yeah.
You know, and a great guy, you know, very helpful. But, and I think this is the complexity of it. But I was having a discussion with someone when that Charlie Kirk assassination happened. And they said to me, I said, you know, I can't believe you, what did I say? I said, pray for his family in this season. And the accusation to me was, you can't say that about a racist. And I said, okay, interesting. Why is he a racist? Because I don't know much about the guy. You know, at that point, I didn't know much.
Yeah.
And they said, oh no, because he made a joke about black pilots. You know, that was the thing. And I said, okay, interesting. I said, can I just ask you a question? Where did you see that? Did you watch the whole interview, the full context of the interview? Or can I maybe just a bit of suspicion here. Did you watch a 30-second reel? Yeah. And you've made a judgment about a man who got murdered in front of his family. Yeah. And now we can't even say pray for, you know, a family.
For his family.
And,
I mean,
you know,
even if he was a racist.
Even if he was.
We can't pray for his family. It's crazy, isn't it?
It's crazy. But this next statement really got me. And I think it's in line with this. Is I said, well, all I challenge you to do is go listen to 2 long-form interviews with the guy. Yeah. And tell me what your thoughts are afterwards. You can still hate him. You can still think he's a racist. I don't actually, I'm not that invested. But I said, just go and watch the long-form interviews. And they said, I don't think I need to go and find context to defend a racist. Right. So that was the line. So it's like, I've got my opinion. And I said, you take a text out of context, you're left with a con. And this is the problem that we've seen with the social media age, even in Belfast, bringing it more locally here, is what's happening now is it's like this rage bait is going through, but no one's looking for the context. No. Can you just talk about that and how dangerous that is for civilization when we lose sight of that.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, I don't know when it was that big tech realized that rage was the best way to get attention. We talk about the attention economy these days. It's the currency. Will you get clicks at all costs? And the reality is some people will. I don't know if you've watched that Louis Theroux documentary about the manosphere. I'm pleased to say, apart from the Tate brothers who were mentioned, I'd never heard of anybody who was in that documentary apart from Louis Theroux. And I was horrified to see, but really the message that came across was, I'll do anything for money. And I think one of them even says during it, I'll do anything for money. And even very incongruent things like, treat these girls terribly who are OnlyFans models, but also I'll be their agent and I'll sleep with them. And it's like, I don't know how you reconcile that circle, but they've got very little in terms of moral compass. So there's a limited value in having that discussion, So there is that side of things. But you realise that whole I'll do anything to be famous, effectively, that money being linked to it, but maybe not the only thing, then boils over into what are the shareholders of any of the big tech companies who deliberately manipulate people's brains, understand more about dopamine than you or I ever will, and hold attention or destroy people's attention spans with reels that are constantly, they say you've got 0.3 seconds these days to grab someone's attention, with deliberate, and the way the whole algorithm game works, if you don't play that game, your content will never get discovered. You're really stuck as an individual if you want to try and get some meaningful content out there on the internet. It's very, very tough. So it is a difficult thing to deal with. And again, it's a classic case of government being nowhere on that front. Big lobby groups, lots of people having lots of money to be able to lobby it. But in terms of coming back to specifically the rage around the Belfast incident and things like that, it's not the first beheading or attempted beheading that obviously we've dealt with inside the UK. It's very something like that I certainly can't imagine being there and witnessing something like that, let alone sitting and filming it on my mobile phone. To be honest, I find that very strange.
Who was that?
Yeah. I don't know, but I mean, I drive past people sometimes on the motorway who have slowed down to film a car that's by the side of the road with someone struggling to change a tire or the bonnet smoking or whatever. And I just think, I just can't even fathom. It makes me really angry, to be honest. I just have to drive on because I just think what you can stop to do that, right? And you've caught my attention probably because you're driving dangerously. You're definitely driving dangerously. You've got a mobile phone out and filming something while you're driving. What's going through your head? But I end up with wanting to grab these people and shake them and think, like, have a look at your life, mate. What are you doing? And that is probably back to the Peterson clean your room sort of approach to the whole thing, isn't it? But it's such a almost like movie level, R18 level of gore, the idea of chopping someone's head off or trying to chop someone's head off, and the zombie knives and the thing that come with all of that, and then the country of origin, and then the faith, the religion thing will inevitably come into it. And we know we've had false starts with stuff like that in a way, but then the Axel Rudiger Gabana thing was minimized completely, whereas really there were other issues at play, but it wasn't the conclusions that people jumped to straight away. And this dangerous society where we suddenly feel like, well, also everyone's got to know everything within 45 seconds. But A, you can't have established all the facts in 45 seconds. And B, you've got people like your friend you described there who aren't willing. They don't want the context. They've made their mind up. They're now in their echo chamber. So by not doing what you suggested very, very calmly and sensibly that they do, they're just saying, "Oh no, I don't." They're effectively saying, "I don't want the facts. I'm not interested in the facts. I've made my mind up. I've seen enough." 30 seconds of someone who's got, what did they teach us in history at school? Question your sources, right? There's no more valuable lesson in today's society than question your sources.
But isn't that history? We're failing to learn from history, but we've been controlled by these algorithms, really, ultimately, because I watch Saint Katie because she's from Northern Ireland. You watch this Irishman and he's like, why are they burning the house down? And he says it's so beautiful accent. But I was like, you can see most people are peaceful.
Yes,
in these,
course.
and I think Katie made the thing of differentiating protesting from rioting.
Yes.
Just having that differentiation, where even if it's semantics, just to say, there's a lot of peaceful protesters. And what should people be doing? Because you're saying like the legal migration side or illegal, when we're looking specifically on the legal side, is I think something that's not talked about enough, and I want to push you on this, is you said, who do we want in the country?
Yes.
And, what do you mean by that, firstly? And what does it look like? Because I do think certain cultures, I'm going to go out on a limb here, struggle to integrate into UK culture.
Yeah. And I think we also don't help because we're all scared about what you get is James O'Brien on LBC saying, well, define UK culture then. Like, it's almost like we shouldn't, or define English culture. Like, we shouldn't have one and shouldn't be proud of one. It's so British. It's so British.
That's causing, but you see, I was watching Piers Morgan debating, I think it was like 4 or 5 years, and you know what he does? He riles everyone up. But an African guy on it, I didn't get his name. He jumped in, and he was the most logical guy, just incredible communicator. And he just said, one of the issues he's noticed since the Black Lives Matter protests and all of that going on, he said, we've had this pendulum swing so far that white people are in a place of this, carrying this guilt.
Yes.
And it's manifesting now in anger because people have lost an identity and they're not allowed to have an identity in their country and who they are. And not to say everyone in England's white, but because it's beyond that. He's saying that we need to allow people freedom to celebrate who they are. And he actually went into colonial history and said, look, the negatives, the positives, slavery. Britain was the first place to end
arguably,
slavery.
We should carry a lot of guilt, but should it manifest itself as anger, or should it be? And then the problem you touched near the reparations argument here, but let's not go there and go towards
not on this one.
let's go to the economic side first of all of the migration debate. Right, we're in a situation where the population pyramid is a certain shape. Over the last certainly 6 years or so, people have dramatically stopped having children, and there's the baby boom. The baby boomers, as they were, the ones who were born just after World War II, there's 45 to sort of 61, 62 is the baby boom generation. There's lots of them, and they're born in 45, they're now 80. If they're born in 60, they're now 65. They are at the point where it's actually 65 on average, where you start taking more out of the system than you pay in. Not just because of your pension, but because of use of the NHS and things like that. And that's just reality, right? There is a problem around that actually, in that today's pensioner has only paid in 80 pence for every £1 they take out the system. And that's 170 billion a year. I'm not blaming the pensioners for that. I blame the government, right? That is because we've been cowards over the years about pension reform, and also how the system works in the first place. We had two choices. Either I pay now because your dad's getting a pension, right? Or my money that I pay is invested for drawing down when I retire. And my goodness me, if we'd gone down the second route, we'd be so much better off than we are. And we might have a sovereign wealth fund alongside it. But anyway, that's done. You can still fix these things, but we've wasted, the thick end of 80 years on doing it in the wrong way, probably. So pension reform is a critical part of that. But what we call the dependency ratio, us nerdy economists, how many people are retired or below working age for how many people are working, is going the wrong way, because all of these people are getting older. We also have this thing as humans, and I'm sure AI will feed into this as well, where we're obsessed with extending our lifespan, right? So we're going to have more older people. So even if people aren't being born, we'll still have people not dying who would have died. You could look at cancer 30 years ago and how many people it killed, and how many people cancer kills today, and you can see that. And the money these days and the big research is going into Alzheimer's and dementia. We're just obsessed with solving these things, and that's not a bad thing. The humans, we're good like that. There are some amazing people who work in those fields. There are some amazing charities that people should absolutely go and donate money to. But it keeps people going who can't economically contribute necessarily because of frailty, aside from anything else, right? And then also, probably the biggest sense of entitlement there ever is, well, I've paid my money in for my pension. It's like, yeah, but you've paid in 80% of what you're taking out. Is that okay? Is that good? How do we solve? And this is a big problem. And the only way we solve it, if we're not having the children and our families haven't got the money, apart from our women are emancipated and don't want to be mothers anymore, or don't want to be mothers as much as they used to be. The change is not in terms of how many children the average person has once they've had a child. The change is whether they have a child or not. And this is because we've moved a lot more towards the sort of equality of opportunity position. Women in their 20s for some years have earned more than their male counterparts in their 20s. And this is a measure of equality that often isn't mentioned. But of course, the awkward biological fact is the men aren't going to be having the babies. Keir Starmer might disagree. We're not going to go down that route on this one either, right? But they aren't going to be having the babies. So, of course, if you then into the whole career thing and you're doing well, that's going to put you off having a family. Then something changes. Biological clocks haven't got the right partner. Lots of people don't have children who maybe would have had children. And that's one of the reasons the birth rate is cratering. The other one is partially, do I want to bring children up in today's world? Partially, have I got the money to be a responsible parent? If you look at the distribution, the people who have the most children are the people in the top income decile and the people in the bottom income decile. It's this weird sort of C-shaped thing because in the bottom income decile, they just crack on and do it. And in the top income decile, they don't need to worry about the money side of it, so they crack on and do it. And it's hollowed out actually at households that earn between about 80k and 100k who feel like they can't afford to have children, even though that's quite a good household income. And again, those are the verifiable facts that you can go and put up on the screen.
But I think that's the interesting part that isn't being talked about, and this is where the psychology of a culture is so important. Because first world countries, I've been studying that in like South Korea. So it's not just a Western thing.
Absolutely not. Japan, South Korea, they've got
Japan.
They're way ahead of us.
Yeah,
China have got an enforced problem. One child policy. Now comes home to roost. Right.
And now they're trying to incentivize, having children. It's too late. And
even in India, the birth rate is cratering.
You see, and this is what as I'm watching this, is okay, 2.1, is it?
That's the deemed accepted replacement rate.
To keep a population stable. Yeah. But most people I'm talking to around my age, in their 30s, they are putting off having kids because they want to travel. Yeah. They want to enjoy life. Sure. And kids are seeing almost an inconvenience to that plan. And then it's the economic factor. And what I kind of, when I have this discussion with people, almost not like an Elon Musk thing where, okay, I need to serve the population and have,
I must spread the demon seed amongst all. Yeah.
And it's like, I need to give good children. Genes, to the world. But I do look at that thing, and I think people understanding where you're going with this is that, okay, pensions, people are aging, not... there are not enough children coming through, meaning the workforce is getting there. And the
ratio between the workers and the non-workers from an age perspective is going wonky.
And then the added complication in the UK where we've got, is it 9 million people on full-time benefits?
That's right, yeah.
Yes, working age.
Yeah, that's population. Right, working age. But, of course, 5.5 million of those are at work. So they are top-ups. They are not, it's not like those people aren't working.
Okay.
I mean, some of them aren't working.
Yeah. So it's a good differential. And some of those would actually like to work more, but if they do, then they lose the benefits.
There's a pretty good measure of how, and this is how one of the ways that the ONS and the Bank of England measure spare capacity in the economy. How much more would you like to work? And that's knocking about an hour and a half a week on the average employee at the moment, which shows that this is underemployment rather than unemployment. And that shows, apart from anything else, that the hidden bits of when we start to lose jobs or we don't create jobs. Thank you, Rachel Reeves. But again, we could digress there. But that the whole point of the dependency ratio chat is to frame the problem. So that doesn't then mean, and this is again where people sometimes go wrong with this debate, I think, that doesn't then mean, okay, so therefore we must have to import people left, right and centre, right? There are a number of things we have to consider. The economically best way always, regardless of what you think about migration, is to increase productivity. Right? So Japan are doing okay at this. They've got a falling population. I think they're about 5 or 6 million people already off their high population watermark, but they're still managing. And this is the classic rubbish there is in the media. Well, we're growing faster than Japan. Yeah, but Japan are losing people and we're still bringing people in. So per capita, and GDP per cap is by no means a perfect measure. It's just a lot better than GDP without the per capita bit. Per capita, Japan are doing pretty well, actually.
Can you just explain that for a ordinary person watching GDP per capita? What does that mean?
So it's the actual total of the gross national income divided by the number of people in the population. So if the people are going up, there's more people ultimately in the denominator, which is making the number smaller. If your population is going down, the bottom of the fraction, the denominator, is actually going to force the figure upwards because it's a negative number, right? So you see and again, you mentioned South Korea, right? They've got similar big problems with replacement rate stuff going on. So we've got populations we could learn from. Now, the distinct difference between Japan and the United Kingdom is Japan have always had a pretty anti-immigration stance, right? Very few people go around calling the Japanese racists, for that matter, interestingly enough. But they have always had that stance. And they're, in a way, island, or set of islands, obviously. But we have similarities in geography in a way, even though we're at different sides of the globe, realistically. Similarly, service-based economies. They obviously had a big manufacturing-based economy, which China have taken a big bite out of in the last 30 or 40 years. But similar issues, and they're doing okay with that. And they've done things like they've integrated robots into their personal care system, because Japanese have got a life expectancy 2 and a bit years, I think it is, longer than the average UK citizen. So they've got even more of a dependency ratio problem, but they're kind of refusing to solve it with migration. Not that you can't get into Japan, but it's pretty difficult. And there's a pretty stringent system. They want to bring people in for certain reasons. So we have this, and this is where Polanski embarrassed himself, didn't he? Because he said something like, "I don't want to be wiping people's bottoms, so I want to import people to do it." He didn't say that, but it came across like that, and it came across as like, this is not a cultured and well-meaning thought of viewpoint, mate. Really, is it? This is like, get other people in because we don't want to do it. And of course, there is that argument of, well, if we've got 3 million people, 3.5 million people on working age benefits that aren't in work, why don't they fill the jobs that are needed? And of course, it's more complicated than that. Have they got the skills? Where are they geographically? What else is the reason? Why are they in the benefit system? Right? They're not all bludgers, right? The majority will not be. Like, the majority will want to work, right? But they can't for whatever way, shape, or form. And some of them will believe that the things that they've been told, and I'm too anxious to go to work. Well, okay, resilience training maybe should be a thing. So there's lots to consider there. But that's where we start from, and we have semi-solved some of that with huge swathes of people being imported. Some of which is because we haven't trained people in the right way. We've got this concentrated problem at the moment between the ages of 16 and 24. That's 1 million young people. That's heading towards 1.25 million young people. Our apprenticeship system is not very good. And I don't know all the details around this, but I know we've got a tenant on a site who has recently been asking us, can they try and cut down the amount of space they rent off us? Is there anything we can do about this? Suggesting they're financially not doing as well as they were. Went to the site, had a chat with them about it. And they said, yeah, the government, so they've got a welding bay. Now, all I ever hear about welding is we're dead short of welders, right? There are people getting paid 4 figures a day on the Teesside Valley Regeneration Project and down in Hinkley Point in Somerset, and I'm sure at other parts of the country, right, because we can't get enough welders. But I went there the other day and there were no welders in the welding bay learning to do anything. There were metal fabricators learning to do things. There was a few other things. So this is sort of alternative adult education, or earlier young adult education, if you like, right? And they said, yeah, the government's cut a load of funding on engineering and this and that and the other. And I was like, what? I hadn't heard about, I'm reasonable fingers on the pulse. I hadn't heard about any of that. And I'm thinking, what can be the logic behind a company that exists to train people, right, that are doing good things, that are taking people who have fallen out of the school system maybe, or have not left school with 9 GCSEs or 11 GCSEs or whatever they need, and are going to go and do practical jobs, which are actually probably quite a bit safer than knowledge work jobs at the moment. How are we supporting them, and what are we doing? No idea, no communication, don't know. But I know that my tenant is struggling on the back of that. So many a decision being made badly, I'm sure, around all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting, eh? It is interesting. I think that, and I think you're so right. I think understanding even like the doctor issue, that we have people leaving the UK trained here and retaining, the talent that's here.
Yeah.
Because I know in Silicon Valley and that they're looking at a similar thing of
Yeah.
Keeping the talent in these companies.
They moved to Texas these days, so that they
Well,
can pay
Austin,
the Texas tax.
yeah. But you look at that with the states competing against each other. What I think we've lost here is that competitive spirit of being British and saying, like, we can actually compete on a world stage and be, technical about it. Because if you look at life sciences, vaccines, all of that,
we're incredible. But I think, we shouldn't be too down on Cambridge still has more startups than Germany.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
We are third in the AI race by a long way. We're a long way ahead of everybody else.
I think the unicorns, we've had more in London, but then they get sold up to...
There's plenty of people involved in AI who are from Britain, DeepMind. They do get sold to the US, but the thing is, if you go back 10 or 15 years, we had no unicorns. So now we've got a new problem. It's a better problem to have. Now we need to work out how to make sure there's enough capital to keep them there. We also need to work out to make sure the American big tech companies don't bleed everything out of our economy, which is why, apart from although he's way outside of his remit, Trump's big beef about our digital services tax is completely interesting because he's looking after his tech bro friends, and completely wrong. And our Prime Minister, whoever that may be in a few months' time, should have the gumption to stand up and say, you're right about this digital services tax. What we need to do is double it. We need to double it, because what we're not going to do is put up with your absolutely fake tax arrangements to get your intellectual property over to Bermuda. If we've got to tax you on turnover, because you guys are going to do all of that, we'll do it. That's what we're going to do. And it'll only happen to the mega caps who are still going to do business in the UK, because they're still going to be sucking an absolute fortune out of the UK, right? So there are ways and means in which we are not strong enough, and we don't communicate enough about intentions and things like that. I said to someone the other day, I think the only way you can try and get someone like Elon Musk to maybe do a bit more philanthropy than he does, because he doesn't do zero, but he doesn't do a lot, right? The only way you can do that is probably embarrass him into it by saying, well, Bill Gates is a much better guy than Elon Musk, isn't he? Because look at all that money he's given away. And appeal to the dysfunctional side of Elon's personality, that he's got to do something about it. Because what's the point of being the richest person in the world? By a scale factor of about, 4 times or something at the moment?
Well, we're about to find out, yeah.
Very unusual for someone to be so far ahead in recent years, and still not be doing some pretty amazing stuff with it around all of that, really. Using it all to maybe try and get to another planet or whatever, which I know he's been trying to do for 30 years or whatever. But come back to the migration stuff and the problem of the dependency ratio and that side of things. Obviously, there are other ways we can deal with that. We can cut benefits, we can cut pensions, we can do all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, if we've got a skills gap, and that skills gap is solved by training and or education, those are between 2 and 20-year projects, which we don't have the political cycle for, apart from anything else. We need more now solutions as a general rule. So therefore, bringing people in that we want is probably a good idea. And we do lots of that. It's still a very attractive place to come live in the Oxcam corridor or whatever. We're not a million miles away from there right now, right? It's a very attractive part of the UK to come and live. And there are fantastic knowledge work jobs out there, whether they be in AI, research, life sciences, as you say. We still have some of the best people in the world. And we shouldn't undersell that fact. Venture capital still does very well here. We're just minnows compared to the Americans. But again, comparison is the thief of joy, right? We're not the United States. Even when you put together everything, I would contend that the US is a worse country to be poor in, or even at the median in, than the UK is. Because aside from anything else, you don't have that level of insurance against the unexpected medical bill. You don't have all of those things that come with it. And certainly if you're below what the technically accepted, although I have a deep issue with it, to be honest, the technically accepted relative poverty line, you're better off in the UK than you are in the US by a long, long way, right? So that doesn't make the US better necessarily. But their economic performance, their economic engine is something that everybody envies, of course.
Absolutely. And I think this, going into, a slightly different track, when you look at Henry Nowak with regards to this 2-tier policing thing, do you think we have a 2-tier policing problem in the UK?
Well, I think there is that demonstrable point around the definitions of, and this is what happens when you embrace positive discrimination. And it's a difficult problem, because how do you move things on? How do you make sure there are more women on the boards of companies. So there is less old, stuffy, public school, white male stuff going on. You can use quotas, right? And it doesn't feel like it's not a perfect solution. You can probably tell it's not a perfect solution, but it might be a better solution than some of the other solutions. And then there's research since that sort of stuff started to happen that actually companies perform better when they have one or more females on the board. And when you've then got the data, then the market can take over, right? In the same way that when there's been racism rife in sport in the past, if you were one of the people if you were one of the clubs that accepted there were people who were undervalued because of the colour of their skin or because of their gender or because they were gay or whatever else it might be, there was actually an edge in harnessing those players and their athletic ability. And you could look like a big virtue signalling wonderful person if you wanted to do that on the side, but actually it was probably smart from that perspective. But when you have quotas to do anything, such as when you're going to have stated objectives, which especially include things like, I can't remember the exact wording, but it does point towards the very, very damaging equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity, you are going too far. And you are trying to tinker with things that you're not going to be able to control. So by definition, you're going to end up with at least a 2-tier policing system. And you've probably got more tiers than that. I mean, there are tiers where if you've got money, you can probably get away with stuff. Let's not pretend that's not the case. And that's the justice system in many parts of the world. Probably worse in the US than it is in the UK. But there is that tier of justice. And then there is and we've seen multiple examples of it, haven't we? Grooming gangs, things like that. People are scared of being labelled as a racist, or they don't want to touch certain subjects, so they get left alone, or they don't get the coverage that they've deserved, and then you end up with a snowball at some point in time. I'm not a big fan of Tommy Robinson, right? But you look back at some of the stuff he did when he had an interview with Jeremy Paxman, I think it's about 15 years ago. You look at Stacey Dooley's documentary in Luton, you look at all this sort of stuff, and you think, oh, well, people might not say that these days. It's a bit too risque. Certainly you wouldn't see it on the mainstream media. You might see it in podcast land where people can have a bit more freedom and have probably got a bit less agenda as well, apart from anything else. But yeah, demonstrably you've got a 2-tier system ultimately. And again, you made a very good point earlier on that once people know the rules, they'll behave in a certain way. The same goes around policing. People know what they can get away with. I'm continually horrified by, and again, I see the argument, right? Kids who are bored and it's half term, they're a problem in leisure facilities and things like that. Now, the Metropolitan Liberal elite side is, oh, bless them, they haven't got anywhere to go or whatever. Now, some of these kids are 6'3", filming themselves, abusing staff in hospitality ventures and things like that. I'm not cool with that, right? On many, many levels. And a little bit of me thinks, I wish they'd give them a kicking, to be honest with you. Probably not the answer, realistically, right? We know that's not the answer. Yeah. But it's the immediate reaction that it stirs within you, you know. But you can see they know exactly what they can get away with. And then they walk away from the police community support officers because there's no actual police out there trying to deal with these things. Having verbally abused them, having done all these things, laughing at them, creating clips that are going to go, sending them possibly privately, possibly on TikTok, because you see what you can share on there and it's absolutely obscene. So the system has broken down in that way that makes it look lawless in many ways, shape or form. And I think people hanker back to, this is pendulums in society, right? They swing too far. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions. All of these, like the quota style system, it's all a good thing. When does it stop? Because what actually happens is people foam at the mouth, and it could be debates about equality of any sort, but you see people then go too far. I see people, there's a pretty public example of it in the relatively bubbly little property community that we live in the other day, where ultimately it's now okay, or it seems okay, for women to show misandric tendencies online against men. And I think I understand what's going on. In them, they're thinking, well, now you know how it feels, right? Then there's the two wrongs don't make a right argument. And then there's well, who needs to call out their behaviour? Because none of the men are going to do it because they're too scared to do it. But then it's also not fair to say, come on then, women, you sort your own women out. It's reality, like it is often, 2 or 3 bad actors who haven't got the self-awareness to see what they're saying is wrong, who won't, just like your friend, won't sit down and watch 2 hours of clips to get 30 seconds of context because they've made their minds up.
Mm.
They've made their minds up. So that's where they are.
And it seems like in all of these, I mean, because the issues are all related in some way, shape, or form, but different. But the cultural pendulum is swinging. And I think what I'm intrigued by is looking at, British history from a Christian religious point of view.
Yes.
There was a certain moral standard.
Yes.
And I had this debate with someone recently where they were very much of the view, okay, you take like an Islamic country, Sharia law, different way of operating. I said, yes. And then I had a friend who's an atheist, and we were talking about, he says, everyone should be a good person. And I said, okay, define good. When you go through defining good, I said, it's so interesting. We're actually on the same page because you come from a Judeo-Christian worldview.
Yes.
So it's influenced you more. But what we see now is a pendulum swinging where there is no standard, external standard that we look into because we're all our own, person. We all have our own freedom. How do we land at a centrist viewpoint? And when I say centrist, I think people can misunderstand that because everyone thinks they're centrist a lot of the time. They don't think I'm a radical lefty or I'm a radical righty. But realistically, I think there is a balanced middle where civilization moves forward.
Absolutely.
And all of these extremes aren't helpful. How do we get there?
I think the only thing I disagree with in what you just said, or certainly have a differing viewpoint on, is that we don't have a compass or a guide anymore. It's just not necessarily the scriptures that have guided humanity for either hundreds or thousands of years, depending on your religion of flavor, right? What we're being guided by is algorithms. And certainly these children are being guided by his algorithms. And so somebody somewhere who has the motive of monopolizing attention, because that's the only currency that they care about, that's the currency that they're measured in, is then appealing to, inevitably, what do all good religions have around them? They guide you in how to behave, right? They generally have a list of things you're not supposed to do. The 10 Commandments, let's say, right? It's telling you what not telling you what to do as a rule. There are bits where it does, but it's telling you what not to do. And some of them pretty obvious. Thou shalt not murder, right? Okay, we're all on the same page unless we're Hannibal Lecter. We're all on the same page, right? Unless we're Dexter, we're on the same page, yeah? And then there's sort of gradations down from there. So how are they being told, if the algorithm is their master or mistress, what to do? How are they being told how to behave? They're being shown things that are going to drive their attention, probably appealing to the 7 deadly sins or whichever you want to pick out of whichever culture or religion you pick, because it's going to appeal to one of lust, gluttony, sloth, etc., etc., etc. And that's causing a problem because it's reinforcing that behavior. So people don't see children, people without properly formed prefrontal cortexes that are being bombarded with this sort of stuff day in, day out. We've got no idea a measurable amount of damage that it's doing to their brain. And it's a serious, and it's that old thing you hear from all the people in big tech. They don't let their kids on this stuff.
This is the crazy part.
But they know, why that is. Because the stuff they've heard in the boardroom and in the reports, in the confidential reports inside the companies, makes them deeply uncomfortable. But when you're together in a corporate setting, you can all be a bit evil rather than one of you being evil. And ultimately the shareholders are happy. Oh, and by the way, you're a billionaire. And then you can all justify that by saying, well, I'm going to do good stuff with my billions of dollars anyway. So, okay, bit of wrong over here, loads of right over here. Yay for me. And that's how you justify your existence to an extent, I think. And that's, it's scary. And it speaks a little bit back to what you were saying earlier on about the cultural assimilation part of migration. That again, people are they want to tiptoe around it because there shouldn't there, realistically, what our expectations are as a country, not just the UK. There are plenty of expectations in plenty of other countries about what would be expected of you. This is where the metropolitan liberal elite normally go, well, you move to Spain and you don't learn how to speak Spanish or whatever. There is a bit of a deep irony in all of that. And if you don't, you won't get served particularly well if you go to certain parts of Spain where they don't necessarily speak that much English apart from anything else. Or you might live somewhere where it's broadly expatriate, But there is that, cultural requirement to fit in. But because we're too scared to even try and define it in the first place, we'll go, oh, it means fish and chips or something like that. It's just something completely deliberately inoffensive, because we don't want to have that conversation. You just end up in a bit of a pathetic place, don't you? And that guidance, that point of, whether it's Christianity, whether it's any other religion, or not even religion, it's just a code that you follow, or just the Judeo-Christian values, let's say, because we live in the West. It's what gives you a framework of purpose and meaning. And without that, life looks more like you're probably 20 times more likely to be a drug addict, and all sorts of other things go wrong in your life, right? So it helps keep you on the straight and narrow and find fulfillment and peace. And when it's like, I would say I'm in a position of privilege where I can do good things for people. I'm allowed, and sometimes I see people look at me and think like, I don't know, I can see them thinking, why are you doing that? Why are you helping me? Why are you doing that? It's because I can. Because I can. And I'm getting, it's selfish in a way, I'm getting something out of it by helping you. It's not so I can write it down in a little ledger and go, oh, Dylan owes me one there, actually, so I'll call that in when I want to. No, not at all. But it makes me feel good as well. So in a way, in the same way that giving to charity should make you feel good, I don't think you should be embarrassed about that. You should get a good feeling about it. If it's a good cause that you believe in and you think they're going to do something good with the money, and you get your gift aid from HMRC, I mean, what's not to like? What's not to like?
No, and I think that's an incredible thought, and understanding what's controlling human behavior from a psychological point of view, and the danger with AI combined into this, which I was going to come to later, but I think it's relevant, is what I've noticed with the Belfast stuff going on right now, is we were just doing this morning some preparation, and we look at, okay, what's real, what isn't?
Yeah.
With the videos coming out, the posters, and Katie was analyzing something and said, oh, this looks AI generated.
Yeah.
This one thing. I said, isn't this so scary that we could literally cause riots in London, in this whole country, through a fake video?
Yeah.
Because people are lazy now.
Yeah.
But also more than that, one of my friends who's been on the podcast, who's an AI programmer, he said, it's getting so good and so quick. Yeah. Where, with Grok, I think it was with Grok, where they were undressing each other and all of that. Yeah. I said, we're playing with something incredibly powerful here, because we're playing with people's perception of reality. And when you control that, you can actually control human behavior beyond reason.
You really can. And you could be talking half a dozen people in the world who can have such a huge impact on, and you hear them all talk. The thing is, government moves outrageously slowly. Part of a lot of the problem with policy around migration, for example, going back to that, was not changing quickly enough. When things changed because of the pandemic, because of Brexit, after the pandemic, you could pick a few other ones there. They wait for like 3 years of figures and then they do something. And by then it's like your Boris waves have happened and the Conservative Party have alienated their voter base for many a long year sort of thing. And they've definitely brought people into the country in terms of undesirable migrants, in terms of their economic status, not in terms of the colour of their skin, not in terms of their age, not even in terms of their culture and religion, although all of those things we should be able to have a sensible discussion about. But I'm talking about their economic status.
Absolutely. And I think that's the one thing, just with, to close off the two-tier stuff with policing, is one of my friends who's a police officer. Yeah. I was talking to him about this and he said, oh, people hate us. I said, oh, that's interesting, because I'm probably the biggest supporter of the police.
Yeah. I definitely don't hate them.
Yeah, having come from a country where I'm like, if anyone who's pro, like, defund the police, go to a country where there's chaos, and you'll be very big. Because who do you phone when someone's in your house with a gun? Exactly. You want the police to come full force there. Exactly. So, but that was his perception of public perception. Yeah. Is that people hate us.
But you know why? Yeah. Probably because the people he sees day in, day out, who are the criminals, ultimately, or criminal adjacent people, they do hate the police. Of course they do, because they spoil all their lovely illegal activity that they'd rather be doing. So you can understand it, but I totally understand. And I think, again, we're very weak, aren't we, in what should be Great Britain. We're very weak at appreciating service that people do for the country. We clap the NHS. We're so polite. We have a golf clap for the NHS during the pandemic. We don't say as much as we should about the heroes, the blue light people in our society and all the rest of it, who do jobs that the rest of us wouldn't do. That we are grateful they exist. So if there's any listening We are grateful for you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, because ultimately, I see the crap they put up with.
Yeah, it's awful.
And I think, how do you do that job?
Well,
you know,
and the thing is, you sort of talked a little bit about the snowball earlier on, and I think we will work towards a situation whereby we start. We police by consent in the UK. Don't believe you do in South Africa.
No, we
right?
use force.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not unthinkable, and this is pendulums again, that someone goes, well, actually, we swung too far. I'm not sure about this policing by consent. What should we be able to do when it's 2:00 in the afternoon and you're walking like I was the other week, walking from a business meeting back to an office, and someone legs it out of B&M at full speed with 2 carrier bags full of whatever? My instinct is to rugby tackle him, right? I really wanted to.
Yeah.
I didn't, right? And there's a number of reasons for that. One of them, not wanting to get a criminal record, because I'm sure that I would get in trouble. They could fall to the floor, hit their head, and they could die. And all sorts of things can happen, right? So something stopped me from doing that, even though I deeply wanted to. And play rugby for 25 years either. So that's
Get back into the game.
We should bear that in mind as well, right? But I was quite a good tackler when I played rugby. So that's what my instinct was. And I'm sure there were 10 other people around that high
would
street.
go viral. I wish we had that content. Adam Lawrence, property investor, takes out.
Imagine if it happens now, everyone will say it's AI or it's staged.
Yeah,
That's the problem. Yeah. That's the problem. But you look at that and you think something more should be able to be done here about those situations, rather than, this is again, you build the system, build the incentives. If you steal less than 200 quid, you won't get prosecuted. Well, there's 199 quid's worth of items just going missing. So, I can't remember the figures of how much gets lost. But this is who pays for that, right? We all pay because B&M and every retail establishment charges more money to make up for the stock that they lose. It's just a commercial decision. My bad tenants are subsidised by my good tenants because we have to allow a percentage for arrears. Makes me sick, to be honest with you. Yeah. But that's where it is.
And you know what's sad about that? Because, and I brought up the policing thing just to encourage people to think through before they say silly things, because we've seen this with Black Lives Matter when that all happened.
Yeah.
People end up in crazy thinking.
Yeah.
And they don't think through the argument.
Defund the police, like you said. I mean, can you imagine no police? So anarchy. I mean, that's where anarchy, and anarchy ultimately is the far left. Realistically, right? Libertarian. This is where the far left and the far right kind of meet, because the complete libertarian approach, no government whatsoever, well, that is anarchy. So that they meet on and this is why you can have some very bizarre protests where you've got like Piers Corbyn on the same platform as someone who's a long way to the right of Tommy Robinson.
Yeah,
they've got a common cause suddenly. It's like, you guys would absolutely hate each other 99% of the time, but on that one issue, you're somehow united. It's a very strange thing, but I think we could end up in a country where we have conversations about the pendulum swinging back to, well, no, we don't police by consent. We tried it for a bit, didn't work because we built this system and too many people just took the mick out of it and abused it and all the rest of it. So we actually regress a little bit. In a way, socially we regress. And this depends on whether you're in the sort of de Tocqueville mode of you gauge society by how it treats its weak and its infirm and its poor or whatever, and it's old, it's elderly. All these things are open to be challenged, and social philosophy, political philosophy, it's all there to be shot at, and it is changing in front of our very eyes, which is why when you had there'd be a decent crossover to a large extent between the views of the BNP and the views of Restore Britain. I think that's a reasonable comment, right? But Restore Britain polling at 7 or 8%. I know some perfectly rational people who are supporting Restore Britain. Whether they'll poll more than 8%, I don't know. But the BNP never polled 8%. They were derided as a bunch of foaming at the mouth, whatever. So what that tells you probably is that the population has shifted in its views, and you have this crazy idea, don't we, that just because we say suddenly that someone has decided nearly overnight that something changes in society, that's racist. A phrase or something that probably isn't racist, but gets called racist, it then brings the floodgate back in for, there wasn't suddenly a time in 1989 or whatever it was when people suddenly weren't racist anymore. They had their thoughts, some of them, a lot of them, misinformed about a lot of things. They then got to, because there was integration in the population, going back to the first generation migrants who are angry about the current migration situation, right? The point is, it used to work. It used to work, and people came in and they worked for the population to an extent to then build things and have things. And those people have now got assets and stuff to defend. And it's not a case of pulling up the ladder. It's like, look at the people you're bringing in now, right? And as I say, some of whom aren't allowed to work, can't work, but some of whom are happy to play the game on the benefit system because we're allowing that to happen.
Absolutely. And I think calling that out is, again, this label of racist. I think that's going to be the big discussion that we come out the other side of this with, is where people are afraid to have opinions.
Yeah.
Because especially, and I'm going to say this, and we'll probably get hate online, but white males are incredibly fearful, of having an opinion because the label's thrown out so quickly, rather than saying, actually, hang on a sec, this isn't a race thing. Like I say, when I sit with my friends, all different races, nationalities, they want the same thing.
Yeah.
They want stability for their families. Yep. They want to see a safe society. When I see some of these things like the shoplifting happening, same thing like you, where being from South Africa, we get stuck in. If something kicked off, you kind of help where you can help. But raising 3 daughters in this country, where I think I want good men around society that would step in if someone tried to assault one of my kids.
Of course you do.
But the fact the thoughts going through their mind is, I'm going to get in trouble. I think that's something which needs to be addressed, and looking at empowering your population. And I think with the UK government right now, there's this apologetic approach. What it feels like, I think this is where Farage and, even Lowe are playing the game.
Yeah.
Is there's a hidden anger. When I speak to my friends who are white British, they will speak to me and say, secretly, because they're scared to say publicly, I'm a reform voter now. Or I'm this. I said, it's almost like this fear because they're like, but I'm not racist. That will come up in the I'm like, why do you need to say that? And it's interesting, Wendy, who you linked me up with, she, the most hate online she's got is from a post we did where I asked her, so you reform, are you racist? And it's this kind of perception people have. So my question to you is, the UK government right now, where are we at, and who do you think can fix this in this next election cycle?
Well, where are we at? Incredibly weak. I mean, tragically weak, right? My biggest fear about the next election cycle is that no one will fix it. And then that leads to a much bigger problem in the election cycle after that. And that's got historical precedent at moments like this. But theorising the landscape in 2034 probably isn't worth too much time, realistically. But it is definitely a fear that I do have, and it is genuine fear. So what are their problems? Not doing what they said they were going to do. Not being too scared to take positions. Not even trying to influence. The concept of the Overton window is what's in the Overton window at the moment. Henry Nowak, for example, what's been going on in Northern Ireland. The Overton window shifts. You can't control everything as a government, as a narrative. It's harder to control than it used to be, because you used to have 6 newspapers that you could play the game with. And if you were Alistair Campbell in 1998, you could control what was going in the media to an extent if you played the game. They were still going to do some things you weren't going to like at some point, but much easier to control, much narrower funnels of information being put out. Different disinformation, but, newspapers have dealt in misinformation for decades and decades, hundreds of years, realistically, ever since the printing press. Printing press invented, misinformation, right? No problem at all. Manipulation, all the rest of that sort of stuff. So that's key. This government doesn't know what they want to be. They don't have a definition. They're too scared to say so many things, but also they don't have a genuine vision and mission that they can then carry out. Right? They say one thing, that the easiest example, growth. That's what we were told. Great. Some of us thought, who knew? We knew we were having a change of government. We thought, well, do you know what? Maybe it is about time. We're definitely not delighted with the Conservative Party. Yep. They're saying that they're going to cut regulations and help things to grow. And those two things are related. The academic data will tell you that. Don't worry too much about the political compass side of it. The academic data will tell you that. Why has the US got such a strong economy, right? Doesn't mean we should have no regulation. That's a bridge too far. Bad actors will pollute water on the basis of making an extra 2 cents a day or whatever, if that's what they need to do, if there's no consequence for them. That's why you need regulations, right? But you need to know who you are, what you are. You've got to state it, and then you've got to say how it's going to be measured, right? Sunak did this. Do you remember? He did these 5 tests or whatever. And he came out with the 5 tests, and I was like, one of them was inflation, which wasn't his remit anyway, which is a penalty kick. One of them was about migration. It was never going to happen. And they weren't, but at least you knew what they were and you could measure them, right? So Starmer's weak. He says anything. He's not politically in any way motivating. He's not a leader of people. He's a technocrat, but he can't win the fight between, I know we need sort of business on side, but then we really want to redistribute and help the people. It's two sides of the tug of war that are pulling against each other, right? Burnham's probably going to win Makerfield. Yeah, bit of a penalty kick, I think, really. There are a few random events that could occur, but ultimately, Restore are taking votes off Reform up there. Reform are the only ones that can beat them. Farage is trying to sort of minimise. I heard him the other day saying about Rupert Lowe, you wouldn't recognise a picture of him if you saw him and things like that. And
he's underestimating him.
He is, but he's deliberately trying to minimise him and make him out not to be important. Now, if Restore stands 650 MPs at the next election, that it'll take a huge bite out of where Reform polled 25%. If Restore polled 7 or 8, Reform probably would have been at 33%. Labour won the last election on 33%, and they had a 180 seat majority, 178 seat majority, right? So probably Burnham is probably the person. I probably look more at who the Chancellor will be because that's the statement of intent of all. And of course, I'm self-interested when it comes to the bond yields, the price of the debt it takes to run my property group, right? We all need to be. Should everybody be self-interested like me? Probably if you've got a house or you ever want to buy a house. Because if you had Polanski in charge, for example, the bond yields might be 8% because he doesn't know what he's doing. The international markets would lose their minds. He would make all these statements. He'd probably talk about cancelling the debt or something equally crazy like that, which would spook international investors. So I don't think Burnham would actually change that much. And that's partially because that will be his excuse for not having a general election. Unless I'm completely wrong and he calls an election because he is the only politician who polls more popular than Farage. Now, as soon as he starts doing stuff, he won't be. There is a rule. Once you go in office, your popularity starts to wane. Donald Trump can't beat that rule. Joe Biden, Barack Obama didn't beat that rule. None of them have managed to beat that rule. Starmer started in the negatives as a politician. He won because he was the only game in town at the time to take the Tories out. And enough people believed enough of the centrist style, like everybody likes to feel that they are, middle of the road sort of stuff, to give them a chance. Now, the flip side of this is, I would say, they also haven't done a terrible job. On some things they have. No doubt about it. On the things they've done an okay job about, they just don't communicate it at all. They don't attempt to. They're terrible communicators. They've got no skilled people in the team. I said Morgan McSqueenie was useless at that stuff. Then he went, and I saw they got even worse at communicating anything. Has Burnham got good PR people, good spin people, all the rest of it? Not really sure. I think he has genuinely done a pretty good job as the mayor of Manchester, right, Greater Manchester. I also watched a couple of long-form podcasts with him on where he doesn't seem to be anything like the foaming at the mouth lefty lunatic that some people are making him out to be. So he'd probably be quite steady, probably won't call an election, probably do a reasonable job. Who's his Chancellor? That's the statement of intent that he puts forward to anybody in business, I would argue, and anybody with a house. So most of the people listening to this pod, I'm sure, right? That's a statement of intent. He could go for Torsten Bell on the left-hand side, who was the old chief executive of the Resolution Foundation, who is a proper economist, but quite a left-leaning one. That could be quite extreme, some of the stuff that Torsten would want to do. We wouldn't like it. Land value tax would be one. Been spoken about forever and a day. Would he implement it? Would he be able to? You'd have to be careful with how you did it. But the point is, however wealthy you are, you can't move the land. So whether you live in Dubai or wherever, right, then you're going to get taxed on UK assets that you own if they're property-based assets, right? And from an economic perspective, it would take money out of the pocket of the landlord more than it would also drive rents up even more because you'd have more people going, well, now I've really got to sell these properties because the ones that are breaking even are now actively losing money. Oh my goodness, the business model doesn't work anymore. And that's one of the many things they don't understand. On the much other side of the party, he would never have Maurice Glassman. So let's say Pat McFadden, right, who is current Wealth and Work and Pensions Secretary. McFadden would be a signal to the bond markets of a little bit of a Jeremy Hunt style, night watchman, We're not going to take too many chances. We are going to trim a few things here. We are going to especially turn the screw on the welfare side of things a little bit, dressed up in the Labour way of we need to stop writing people off. And I say that cynically. I do agree with that argument, actually. You definitely are. If you're throwing money at people for not doing anything, you are facilitating them not doing anything. You do have to take responsibility as a government for that. Exactly. Back to incentives and outcomes. Right, so that's your sort of spectrum of chancellors with a litany of semi-competent and incompetence in the middle of that. Johnny Reynolds being a pretty good example of one of those, right? He's just plastic and he'll do what he's told. So he doesn't really have many views of his own from what I've ever seen of him. So that's a big factor. It wouldn't be that hard. And look, some of it is, I mean, you know, while I was on the way up here or this morning, Trump's been the old tweeting, hasn't he, saying that it's all over in Iran, don't worry about it, all sorted. Kind of what we said would happen realistically. He'd just wake up one day, get a bit bored of it all and go, yeah, it's all over, don't worry. And it'll be over in a couple of weeks now. So there we go. Stock market's up 1,000 points or whatever. Crazy stuff. But it's what's played out. So we are beholden on that for things like the interest rate and things like that. We could do with that clicking down 25, 30 bips, being a bit better. You know, housing market has started to slow over the last few weeks in terms of transaction volumes, but it's gone from healthy to still okay. It's gone from back to, it's not going as well as it was in 2025, but it's doing better than 2024. So let's not alarm anyone by me saying that, but obviously I watch that stuff pretty closely. Yeah. So that's the political sort of pass through into the economic side of things. What will Burnham ideologically want to change? I mean, they've just had a King's speech. This is where you're supposed to lay out all your policy. They can't have another King's speech just because he comes in, I don't think, necessarily. What will realistically happen is we'll have a summer of absolutely nothing happening, which it doesn't anyway, which is actually good for the economy, I would argue, right? Because they don't get in the way at that point in time. You just get on with it. Last summer, if you remember, we had a horrible time because they started talking about all the taxes they were going to put on property in the 2025 budget. And they didn't really do that much at all in the end, apart from the HVCTS high value council tax surcharge, which is one of those things that realistically is a bit of a spec and hurts you a lot more in a £2 million house than a £10 million house. But it's not, once it's in, it's in. It's one of those things. You just get on with it. You know, Streeting was talking about equalising capital gains tax and income tax, which is a bit nuts, to be honest with you, because capital gains tax receipts will go through the floor. But they're not huge, they're sort of 7-8 billion sort of number from property. So would that change things massively? I don't know. But that's roughly where we're gonna be politically, probably until 2029. I visualise them at the moment clinging on by their fingernails. Maybe Burnham comes in, does 12 months, does okay, but communicates some of the stuff that has gone better and calls an election. That is a possible. I don't think he calls one straight away. I think everybody calls for him to call one because they'd love to have a go, especially Farage at the moment. But the next election, as it stands at the moment, is a hung parliament. And Restore are pretty much guarantee that's clipping the wings of where they are. Green Party have sort of topped out about 15%. Polanski seems to have lost his way a little bit. And there's too much. It's too crowded over there with the Lib Dems and with Labour. You know, and there's just too much. There's too many ways. There's only a number of people. If your party had really become a thing, it would have fractured things even more. So it's coalition or hung parliament or minority government, minority coalition government. I don't think you can do that, actually, to be honest. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that one up. But yeah, and then what does that mean? It probably means nothing gets done. Is that bad? Not necessarily, actually, as it goes. I mean, what did the last coalition government do? Yeah.
I think when we look at the government, and what makes me sad about the UK right now, and this is why I actually got my citizenship.
Yeah.
You know, because thank you, because I'm Irish, so I didn't need it.
Yeah.
But I thought if I need to jump in the ring.
You could tell the Irish accent, actually.
Yeah. Yes, of course. It's all coming, you know, the integration's gone well. But the reality of, hey, as someone who's arrived in this country with very little, and seen the opportunities.
Yeah.
And I feel incredibly blessed to have been in this country. And you want to fight for it. You feel this responsibility. You feel, no, actually, I think I can do some good here. And this is partly with the free speech stuff, with being on a podcast. And I've said to Katie, we've ordered more microphones. And I said, look, we need to get people different opinions equal kind of intellectual capacity to have genuine conversations across the board. Because what worries me about where the political is going is who can inspire this nation? You know, when with Trump, people love him, hate him. When you see those rallies, people are, you know, absolutely captivated with a vision for America.
Yeah.
And proud to be American and just, you know, this kind of going for it. And half the country, yes, they hate him. But the reality is the economy was booming. Like the stuff he bought, but I was like, who's going to do that for Britain?
Oh, look,
in this chapter, you know?
It's a great question. And interesting enough, if you know anything about politics of France, Macron kind of broke the mold a little bit and told the truth a little bit more than your average political operator. Obviously, much more in the centre than a Trump-style character. Mark Carney pulled, you know, victory from the jaws of defeat in Canada because things were going terribly with Trudeau in charge, and they were penalty kick. Pierre Poilievre was a penalty kick to win the election. I don't know, maybe 8 weeks out or whatever, and Carney just completely turned it around and is now, you know, there's no question about who's in charge in Canada. So I think he's quite a straight. But the trouble is, you're couched in he or she is quite a straight operator for a politician being the qualifier because you just expect them to lie. I personally feel people are sick of being lied to, and there is a lot of room for someone centre-ish, perhaps economically conservative, socially liberal, perhaps the other way round, right, to make a real difference. But imagine doing that at the moment and fracturing the system even more and injecting the UK's Macron into the equation, who gets 15% of the vote. Well, no one's ever the only thing you could do is pass a proportional representation. And it's one of the things I've thought about recently because people are like, well, how do you fix? We do have a problem. You know, China have an advantage in not having elections every 4 or 5 years. The cycle is too short. Some stuff that needs to go on. One of the things that I will always say about Rachel Reeves is fair play to her. She enacted some things that will only vest in 10 plus years' time. Now, when she enacted them, she might have been over-optimistically thinking, we're at least a 2-term government. Don't worry, everything will be fine. And I can claim credit for all of this in 2034 or whatever. Maybe she was thinking that. I don't know if she was. I think she was trying to do the right thing. Give her the benefit of the doubt on that front in terms of infrastructure investment that will take time. And there is a ton of infrastructure investment going on in the UK. One thing to be really, really positive about as it goes in terms of job creation, as we're pumping money out there into the economy as a general rule, in terms of the circular flow of income, and then in terms of when you've built the infrastructure, that then helps to grow the GDP, right? So there's a lot of positives around that side of things that again, what's the problem there? Labour haven't communicated it effectively or at all. They haven't communicated it at all.
Communication.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing is, I was chatting to a friend who's a leader for quite a large organization. He said every relational breakdown comes down to this acronym ACE,
right?
Where it's assumption, communication, expectation.
Yes.
And if you have a business relationship and you're assuming certain things,
yes,
you haven't communicated,
yes,
and you're expecting different things from each other.
Yep.
And I looked at it, I was like, every time I've had conflict, whether it's marital to, you know, kids, whatever
joint
it is.
Ventures.
All
of mine would fit into that. Absolutely.
Into that category. And I kind of feel like with politics now, if we could get someone that could communicate well and get those assumptions out the way, like what is in our power, what's not.
Yep.
You know, when you look at perception of immigration, et cetera, it's like, what are we responsible to do? Let's get those expectations clear, because otherwise you just end up in a crazy place. And
I think Farage is there, isn't he? At AC. Farage is there at AC. You can be fairly clear on the assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, it's not enough, which is why they're defecting to Restore, right? And communication, whether you love or hate the man, you cannot argue he's a magnificent communicator, right? But ultimately, I'm going to change the E here to execution, because that's the fear that reform can't execute. And maybe that's unfair, but they haven't executed before. And you're seeing some of the stories about some of the councillors who turn up at the wrong building and do this and do that. And you just think, again, I'm in favour of shaking up the political system. I'm in favour of booting out the old boys club or whatever it is that was in there and injecting some new councillors. I'm then concerned they've got a pretty important job. And a lot of what they do is quite boring and statutory in terms of really important stuff like adult social care, like children's social care, key like housing, right? And they've got to follow their statutory obligations. And if you then have got people sitting there thinking, well, let's try and find an excuse not to house these people because they're first generation migrants, for example, Change the law. If you want to change the law, if you want to have a debate about it in Parliament, if you want to do that out there, fine. Don't do what's already the law or bring unnecessary bias to the table. Don't do that, right? Being a councillor is an important job, drastically underpaid, just like vast majority of public servants to be any good, which is why barely anybody above the competent does it, unfortunately.
Adam, we are out of time. So I want to thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for being so open and real. There's so much more I wanted to discuss with you, but we'll have to get another time to discuss these things, you know, talking as things unfold in the country. And I think we both share genuine concern, you know, for our future, for our children. And yeah, so I really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we can get you on again.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed that.
No, sure.